I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the News du Jour, a calmer space to consume the news. I wanted to remind you guys real quick here at the top that this is the last episode of the week, and I know it's cheesy, but you guys are one of the biggest things that I am thankful for this year, just this growing audience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for trusting us with your news. I know you have a lot of options, but we appreciate you coming here to stay informed. We also wanted to remind you guys that we will be having a Black Friday sale, so look out for that social media post. And with that, we will go ahead and jump into the news for today. So here at the top, I had just a quick follow-up on yesterday's story about the earthquake in Indonesia. So unfortunately, the death toll has now reached 252 people, which is quite a bit higher than we reported yesterday. So I just wanted to, keep you guys posted on that. This disaster has been really rough, even though it happened in a very rural area. So if you missed that story, definitely go back and listen to yesterday's episode. And then first up for today, the U.S. Supreme Court rules on Trump's tax documents. So as we all remember from civics class, the Supreme Court is the be-all and end-all in the U.S. justice system. So now, the issue of Trump's tax documents has been resolved once and for all, after years of Democrats requesting them. The Supreme Court opted unanimously not to block Congress's access to Trump's tax documents. Now, it's unclear how quickly Democratic leaders will be able to get their hands on these prized documents, but if they can do so before the end of the year, they might have time to do something with them. If not, as we know, the House will flip over to the Republicans, and it's unlikely that they would follow up on any wrongdoing by the former president. Stay tuned. And next up, the UN has finally spoken up about Iran. I hope you guys had a chance to listen to our bonus episode about Iran, where we sat down with Elika Laban, a second-generation Iranian lawyer and activist, to discuss the current protests. One of the many frustrations we discussed was a lack of support from leading international organizations who supposedly defend human rights, namely the UN Human Rights Council. Because human rights violations in Iran right now, especially lately, have been atrocious. Some of the most horrifying I have ever heard about outside of all-out genocides. But now, Amnesty International is directly calling on the UN to take action by convening an investigative body. And it seems like that's exactly what they're planning to do. Amnesty said that they have compiled a list of over 300 names of people unlawfully killed by the regime in the past 2 months. But we know that the death count is likely much higher and includes at least 40 children. And now, finally, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights has spoken out on the subject, and he described it as critical. They have called a meeting for the UN Human Rights Council members in Geneva this Thursday, where they will discuss the protests more in depth. Witnesses and victims will be heard by diplomats so that the international leadership can get a clear view of what exactly has been occurring at the hands of the regime. This special session could prove key in turning or overturning the regime, or at least slowing down this bloodshed. The commissioner also called for bodies of protesters to be released to the families, and he condemned the withholding of those bodies by the Islamic regime. You see, the regime is using these bodies of the deceased as a bargaining chip to try to get families to agree to their narrative and stop protesting. Horrifying. And there are even reports of bodies of protesters being stolen by the regime out of the morgues there. Now relatives of fallen protesters have taken to putting their dead relatives literally on ice at home so as to preserve evidence of their death for any potential future investigations. The Human Rights Office even urged the Iranian government to, quote, address people's demands for equality, dignity, and rights, end quote. But it may be a little too late. So many people have been brutally killed in plain sight. How can people ever trust or rely upon these leaders ever again? How can the relatives of murdered children just accept that their government killed their child? How can things ever go back to normal after so much blood has been shed? The truth is, they can't. If you guys haven't taken a second to listen to our episode with Elika, I highly recommend it. It's just further down in our feed called Stories from Iran, an interview with Elika Laban, and it's about 30 minutes. It's not super long, and it will give you a great overview of what's happening there. Even though it is hard to hear, it's really important to be informed on this issue. And next up for today, Kim Jong Un's sister is now issuing threats against the United States as well. So just yesterday, Kim Jong Un's sister was quoted as saying that the U.S. would face, quote, a more fatal security crisis, end quote. This seems to be a reaction to American leadership pushing for the UN to speak out against North Korea's missiles tests. The U.S. is looking to have limits put on North Korea's weaponry, and this is not sitting well, apparently, with Kim's sister. 14 different countries came out in favor of these limitations, including Great Britain, France, Australia, Japan, and the U.S., of course, who was kind of leading the push, according to the AP. But of course, China and Russia teamed up to oppose the measure, and they both have veto power on the UN Security Council, ironically. So the measure was shot down. And this isn't the first time that voting about North Korea has gone down like this. Kim's sister also equated the US to a, quote, barking dog seized with fear, end quote. But North Korea is testing bigger and bigger missiles lately, and worries are arising that they may be gearing up to test a nuclear weapon soon. Some experts think they already have them. Some experts think they are a ways away from being able to produce them. But either way, the measure to curb their weapons programs has been shot down. If anything changes there, we'll be sure to let you know. And last up, before the holiday, State of Oregon pardons over 45,000 inmates for weed-related offenses. So, Oregon's Governor Kate Brown has now pardoned 47,144 convictions for possessions of 1 ounce or less of marijuana. having these criminal convictions on your record, as we know, can mean missing out on jobs or housing opportunities. And now these records will be cleared. Additionally, about $14 million in unpaid court fees will also be forgiven. The crimes that these people were convicted of no longer exist in the law books today, and so now they don't exist in the records either. And that is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "Sometimes the end and the beginning are actually the same place." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review or shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us be able to keep creating the news du jour. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugarfreemedia. You can also follow us on social media under sugarfreemedia.co on Instagram and just sugarfreemedia, all one word, on TikTok. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from